everything changed in Caravaggio's life when he got on the public stage. And on the public stage he got in July 1599, when the Cardinal del Monte, that lived here in this yellow building, together with Caravaggio at that time, and other masters, of course, heard that this church, the church that was next door, basically needed an artist for completing a chapel that was half made, for completing it very quickly, because the church had to be ready for the Jubilee of the 1600s. And so the Cardinal del Monte presented to that church, that was the national church of the French people in Rome, is the national church of the French people in Rome, Caravaggio, telling that he could do what they were waiting for. So he produced for a chapel of this church between July 1599 and July 1600 two paintings. That is about the calling and the martyrdom of St. Matthew. In reality, the paintings that we have in the church are three, because all of the three that you see here were painted by Caravaggio. But the one that he made between 1599 and 1600s are these two. The one to the left represents the calling of St. Matthew. St. Matthew was a tax collector, is mentioned in the Gospel. He was then called by Christ to follow Christ. And, or better, he was invited by Christ to follow him. He decided to leave everything, to change his life, and to follow Christ. So Matthew is another subject that could work very well as a model of conversion. And then he became the evangelist, so he wrote a gospel, one of the four gospels, and then, according to the tradition, he was killed while he was saying a mass in Ethiopia. During the persecutions of the Christians. And these are the two paintings that he did in 1599, while this one in the center was made 2 years later. It's a long story, the one of this chapel. If you will ever come to Rome, we will talk about it more in depth. But it took 30 years to complete the decoration of this chapel. Other artists had already started it, but they had left it interrupted. Also, the patron of the chapel also had died before he had seen the chapel completed. But Caravaggio was the one who finished the project in 1602, and he made those paintings for a church that is very strategically located along the way that the pilgrims usually did for going to the northern gateway of the city toward the Vatican. And this is what helped Caravaggio also to become very successful, because it was a church super visited not only by the locals but also by foreigners. As these paintings had to be ready for the Jubilee, the patrons of this chapel, that were the heirs basically of the cardinal that was buried there, decided to in some ways exploit the story of St. Matthew to be not only a sort of celebration of the memory of the cardinal who was buried there, but also the chance to help the pilgrims that were expected in this church to follow Matthew's life as a model. And in fact, the questions that were asked when it was planned, the decoration of this chapel, were, but what was the intended function of the paintings, and who were they made for? Because this is a private chapel, not everybody can enter it. Usually the people stay out for admiring the paintings, so they don't have a central viewpoint, but a diagonal viewpoint. And another question that was asked was, but how could the people, the pilgrims outside the chapel, be engaged in the story of St. Matthew? Caravaggio found some solutions for these necessities. First of all, he increased the contrast between light and darkness. And here we see the Caravaggio that we all know. If you notice, his earlier paintings had a background that was much lighter, with a light that was very directional but never too contrasted, while in his paintings we see more contrast. And then another thing that he did was to dress many of the characters in the stories with the clothes of the people of his time. This was a way to actualize the theme. We see the same also here. And then another thing that he did was to orient the compositions of his pictures toward the people that look at these pictures outside the chapel. So the direction of the movement is always from the altar side toward the outside, and you see, following these arrows, how the movement takes toward the people that stay out of the chapel. This is something very revolutionary, because it brings the main characters of the stories not toward the center of the paintings, but toward the sides that is closer to the real people that look at this paintings from the outside. It's a way to bring the story of Matthew toward them, to engage them better into the stories. Also, the light that we have in these paintings follow the same directions. In reality, in the Calling of Matthew, we have two different lights, one that goes from the above and another one that is the most important, that shows up in the dark, from the darker part of the painting. The meaning of these lights are clear, because if we connect this painting into the context for which it was made, we understand that the upper light is anything more than a sort of extension of the real light that gets into the chapel, but the second light, the one that shows up in the darker part of the scene, the one that shows up together with Christ and that follows his calling, comes from the altar. So we have to interpret it as not a real light, but as a light that is symbolic of the grace of God, of the Spirit of God that gets into the life of the people. We have the same kind of symbolism of the light. We had it already expressed even in the Mary Magdalene during her conversion, because the light that enlightens her from below is a light that doesn't have a clear source, so mysterious and spiritual, while the one above is more connected to an ideal window that is open into the room. The gospel about the calling of St. Matthew is not very detailed. Jesus passing on there saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he says to him, "Follow me," and having arisen, he followed him. And so Caravaggio tried to express the story in a clear way, going also in what were the requests, also more detailed, that he had in the contract. But the moment represented here is the one of the calling. Christ just entered the room of the tax collector together with St. Peter. His mouth is opened, is extending his hand toward the sinner to call him to the conversion, and so it's the most dramatic moment of the story in reality. To give more dignity to the figure of Christ, then Caravaggio also quoted the famous hand of Adam in Michelangelo's creation of Adam in the Sistine Chapel ceiling. St. Matthew is to be shown into his office with all of the objects that are typical of his job. So we have here the ink box, then the pen, the money on the table, the book. The figures around the table are dressed in different ways. This is more shabby and these are more noble. These two are very similar to this boy that didn't understand what was truly happening. And in fact, all of the people around the table react in different ways. It seems that they haven't understood that in front of them there is Christ. Then we have this man that is very controversial, because many people believe that this is the Matthew of the scene. In reality, is dressed as a nobleman with a sort of a medal in his head, in his hat, very elegant, and is paying his tribute to the tax collector, if you notice carefully, because this is his arm and he's putting the coins on the table that somebody else is collecting, also in a quite fast way. The boy that is collecting the money, so the tax collector in the scene, is this one that is dressed also in a quite shabby way, or better, in a way similar to the fraudsters that we have seen in the scene of the gamblers. And the patron of the chapel had asked that he was dressed in a proper way. And so Matthew is this guy shown in a moment in which he's still collecting money, still attracted by the money, but is not yet answering to the calling of Christ, because the scene shows not the moment of the answer given, that is the most relaxed moment in some ways, but is the moment before. Is the moment in which basically the sinner is asked to make a decision, the money or the calling of Christ, the life spent following the money or the new light that is warming up his shoulders. That is a very dramatic moment of any conversion, the choice that we have to make, even if we have to be helped by the light of God. The other paintings show the happy end of the story. So in some ways, Matthew transforming into the evangelist, following exactly what the angel is asking him to write in the gospel, in a moment in which he's so concentrated on what is the angel is saying that is almost falling down out of the scene through this bench that is half in, half out. And then the moment in which he's killed during the mass by a killer, half nude, because he was almost going to be baptized, in a very dramatic situation when everybody is going away, nobody helps him, but the angel of God is giving to him the palm leaf, symbol of the victory over the death of all of the Christian martyrs. Also here, Caravaggio quoted very classical models. For the killer, he quoted this very famous sculpture, maybe if not this one, another copy of it, that is insomma the disc thrower, and he included himself into the scene because this face that you see here is his portrait. So in place then signing in, he showed himself, and this is an expression of his pride for having done his first public work.